I nearly forgot to bring it with me. Partly that is because I'm, like I often do, mostly I do, preach to myself this morning, so I know what it is I want to say to me, and I'm inviting you to eavesdrop on that. So the first question that I have for myself this morning, and I'm asking it of you, is there anybody here who thinks they have a perfect body? I'll ask it again. No hands. There's not a single hand up or even a nod. Let me ask it again. Is there anybody here who thinks they have a perfect body? Great. Well, not many of us, just one. Not many of us think we do. There are bits we don't like very much, and some bits we like quite a lot, I'm guessing. Some bits that don't work as well as they might, and other bits that work quite well. But this is the body we have. It's the one other people recognize us by, because it looks different from their body or from other bodies. Just look around and you'll see. You don't look quite the same as other people, do you? No. But it's the one we've got, and by and large, it's fit for purpose. By and large, it's fit for the purpose that is our purpose, even though we might not be quite clear what that is. Many years ago, 1983 to be exact, for those of you who like precision, I was at the World Council of Churches in Assembly in Vancouver, and a very small woman stood up to preach at the main Assembly Eucharist, presided over by a lineup of robed church statesmen, and attended by some of the most notable Christian leaders of the world at that time, all of them male. Bishop Desmond Tutu was among them. He was not Archbishop then. The small woman's name was Lois Wilson. She was the moderator of the United Church of Canada, and she stood up to speak on body language. From my place in the congregation, two main reactions were visible. There was much fidgeting and wriggling on the one hand, sort of embarrassed, and the other a sort of frozen shock. What was this little woman going to say? Well, I can't remember the details of what she said, but I have always remembered the core of her message. What do we want the body of Christ, the church, to say to the world? To say to those who are struggling for life and freedom? What do we want it to say to those who are locked in by their own fears and despair? To those who can't see the implications of their decisions and actions? What do we want these people to see when they look at us? What message does the body language of the church give to them? Well, feminist discourse was just beginning to make an impact in those early 80s. But even so, to talk about bodies and body language was a brave departure from the usual sermon topics at gatherings such as that. Bodies were more likely to be thought of as carnal, earthbound, and sinful by comparison to the spiritual gnosis sought after by those who would have us look toward heaven rather than toward earth. When the word body was uttered, it was female bodies that came to mind. And female bodies are unpredictable, changeable, and a little bit icky. And of course, a source of temptation to men. We know that. Women have bodies, men have minds. So you can imagine the impact of this small woman setting out to talk about body language, and the body language of the church at that, at this august gathering. Bodies have been worrisome, troublesome for women for centuries. Many of us grew up with the idea that our body was not perfect enough, that we did not meet the ideal body shape to fit what was beautiful or attractive. Many women, young and old, suffered physically as well as emotionally as they tried to control their uncontrollable bodies. We still hear even today of girls and women struggling with anorexia, bulimia, or one extreme diet after another. It seems it is still hard to accept the body we have. Body image still seems to be more of an issue for girls than boys, though not exclusively, of course. I've never forgotten that first time I was challenged to think of the church in relation to body image, to think of it in female-referenced terms. Today I find myself reflecting on the notion often as I wonder about the church, and as I wonder about this community in particular. We speak of ourselves as the body of Christ, and I wonder what people see when they look at us. I wonder what our body language says today. Well, when I read the epistle that was set for this morning, I must say I had a bit of a giggle. A little of a nervous giggle, if I'm honest, because we heard that from Paul's letter to the church in Corinth this morning. He was either very brave or very foolish to use the human body as an image of community relational health. Corinth was at the crossroads of trade routes and a rather wild place known for its vice throughout the world of the time. And Paul wasn't too keen on physical bodies. Certainly sex was not on the agenda, as far as he was concerned anyway. If you couldn't manage celibacy, then and only then marriage was the better part. But he did use a body image to impress on his hearers in Corinth their mutual need for each other and the need for mutual respect of difference. The body was not complete without all its parts, the weaker bits as well as the well-functioning bits. They all have their place and they all need respectful care. So it is, of course, with the body of Christ. No matter our cultural background, no matter our theological perspective, no matter our place of origin, no matter our gender, no matter our social location, our wealth, or our education, we need each other to be a fully functioning body. We need each other to learn what it means to be a body together. So while I struggle with Paul's attitude to women in general, he is a bit of a misogynist, I applaud his struggle to hold together the social attitudes that he grew up with, the context into which he speaks, and the challenging, life-changing epiphany of his conversion to following the Jesus way. Don't think that it was easy to preach the message of Jesus in those times of oppression and persecution. It surely wasn't. And we know Paul spent time in prison and chains for what he was saying. We know from our own experience that speaking across the grain of common wisdom brings more often than not ridicule and resistance. We only have to think of how long it has taken to get climate change onto the political agenda for change, and how many deniers there still are who promote fear of change to the common practices that we're used to. Think of those who sail the seas to protect the oceans and the sea-living species from the ravages of fishing and our continuing oil exploration, and from our propensity to use the oceans as a rubbish dump. Think of those who proclaim paying a living wage sufficient to live on is too expensive and erodes profits. The message Paul wants his hearers to understand is that we need each other. Together, it is together that we are the body of Christ. Alone, we are not the body. Alone, we cannot do what is required to ensure the freedoms to be found through the life and message of Jesus of Nazareth are distributed to everyone. The hope that he preached, the hope to be found in the new life of the risen Christ, the confidence-boosting affirmation that we are loved by a generous God, just as we are. Paul was a great PR man, you might say. Great PR man for this new movement of Christ followers. And like all good PR people today, he knew how to appeal to the hopes and aspirations of his audience. He knew, what is the term? What the clickbait would be. He knew reassurance and hope were more likely to appeal than fear, though he could use that too. He knew joy and love and the fulfillment of dreams were likely to get a hearing. And he knew bodies would catch their attention. So body language becomes his dominant motif for persuading his hearers to listen. Paul knew his own body was not perfect, just as most of us feel and think we know that our bodies are not perfect. His message encourages us to love each other anyway. That is, together, with all our imperfections, all our frailties, all our strengths, all our self-doubts, that we can be the body of Christ, bringing the good news of God's life and hope to others as well as to ourselves, if we do it together. We may not be the perfect body, but together we're good enough to do what is required for love and for justice. For the core of the message as to what this body needs to be doing, we turn to the gospel. The gospel lays out for us, in particular the message of Luke that we heard this morning, what it is the body needs to equip itself to do. As Luke tells the story, Jesus emerges from the desert after his epiphany, filled with the Spirit. And after teaching around and about for a while, he comes to his hometown and attends the synagogue like any good Jew. And he reads from the scroll of Isaiah that everyone was familiar with. And that piece that he read set out the agenda for his ministry. Economic sustenance for the poor, freedom for those captive by unjust systems, insight to those blinded by the status quo and empty promises, and liberation to those living under oppressive colonization. Initially, what he said was well received by those who were in the synagogue with him, until that is, they realized he was challenging them to change their life and relationships and to do something about the situation in their town too. He was not just talking about other places and other people and other situations. And when they realized this, guess what? They were filled with rage, says Luke, and they drove Jesus out of town. Saying words about love and justice and peace and respect is not enough, I'm sorry to say. It's a beginning. It's challenging enough for those who hear. But as I've been challenged many times by people who listen to me, it's not enough. The truth of what we mean by the words we say will come to light by our body language, by how we look, and more importantly, by what we do collectively as the body of Christ and as individual members of that body. So I'm challenged as this new year gets underway, wondering what the body language of St. Matthew's will say in this coming year. I'm wondering who will be affirmed by what we do. I'm wondering what priorities will be evident by how we enact those things we dream of, our aspirations. And I know, and it's very tiring to think, but I know that it's me, along with you, who can ensure that our body language is in line with Isaiah's message that Jesus read that day in the synagogue. And I know, too, that the Spirit of God will help with the energy when we meet together that alone I find I'm lacking. And that will be true for you too. Jesus set out for his followers and for the townsfolk who knew him what he believed the good news of God to be about, what it meant to be filled with the life-giving, energizing Spirit of God. We know too. So I'm looking forward to working with you this year as we shape the body language of St. Matthew's, as together we get fit for purpose, as it were, fit to enact the Isaiah proclamation that Jesus read that day in the synagogue.